It's time to engage, educate, and empower with Tracey Maxfield.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Engage, Educate, and Empower, the podcast which aims to highlight the social issues, life challenges, and day-to-day problems that children, teenagers, and young adults around the world deal with. As you know, topics that I've discussed include mental illness and suicide, foster care and adoption, drug addiction, bullying. And today we're going to talk about a very sad and difficult subject, death. How can we help a child or a teenager who has experienced a death of a parent, a grandparent, a friend, a classmate? And so I'm very honored that my special guest today is someone that can speak truly to what it feels like. Patrick Veroneau is the founder of the Emery Leadership Group, and he also hosts a weekly podcast called Reimagining Leadership. And I'm very, very honored to say that I've been a guest on that podcast. He has a master's in organizational leadership and has trained extensively in the areas of emotional intelligence, influence, and personality. Many of the models he has developed are rooted in the research and real-world experiences from these three disciplines. Patrick has focused his career on helping individuals, teams, and organizations reimagine what it means to lead and succeed on a more conscious level. As well, he is a member of Forbes Coach Council, the Harvard Business Review Advisory Council, the National Speakers Association, and is an adjunct instructor for SMCC. He was also the president of the board and a volunteer at the Center of Grieving Children, and has worked extensively with children and parents of the families who've been impacted by the death of a loved one. So, as per usual, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we return, it'll be my great pleasure to introduce you to Patrick Veroneau.
Tracey Maxfield is a retired nurse with over 36 years' experience in mental health and dementia. She has spent years studying, researching, and writing on dementia care, mental illness, and bullying in teenagers. Tracey struggled with chronic depression starting in her 20s, and after years of intense workplace stress, bullying, and harassment, her chronic depression intensified. Tracey wrote her book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, My Journey Through Depression, as a way not to only relieve her stress and anxiety, but to help her friends and family better understand depression. The book became an international guide for mental health awareness, allowing Tracey to focus her attention on helping children, teenagers, and their parents work through mental health issues and bullying. She travels all over the world to meet with schools, mental health advocates, and experts in the mental health fields. She also offers online courses to help children, teenagers, and their parents work through issues, bringing families closer and to bring awareness to bullying in society. For more information on Tracey, her mission, the show, Tracey's book, and offered courses, visit traceymaxfield.com. You can see the latest news on mental health, upcoming guests on the podcast, read Tracey's blogs and articles, and more. Plus, follow Tracey all over social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube to watch the podcasts. See her daily messages and motivation and learn about each podcast guest and experts. Plus, while you're on the website at traceymaxfield.com, be sure to sign up for the free monthly newsletter. Follow Tracey with her upcoming events, interviews, seasonal tips, and the latest articles discussing important mental health topics and issues. And when you subscribe, you'll get a free copy of Tracey's booklet, Why Our Kids Are Suffering and How We Can Help Them. Just go to traceymaxfield.com. Tracey is committed to bringing parents and their children closer, to battle bullying and bring awareness to the mental health of children. That's why Tracey is offering her online courses to any adults, parents, children, and teenagers struggling during those hard times, sign up for the course at traceymaxfield.com. You'll receive 8 full modules, over 12 videos, resources, and support discussing mental health, mood disorders, eating disorders, behavioral disorders, social media, drugs, suicide, risks and signs, and much, much more. Plus, you'll get access to Tracey's private Facebook group for individuals going through the same thing you are. Connect with others and share ideas, support, and motivation with Tracey helping along the way. Tracey's online courses is now for a limited time available for only $158. See all information online at traceymaxfield.com, where a brighter future is possible.
Welcome back, everyone. And as promised, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to today's guest, Patrick Veroneau. Patrick, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is an honor for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I mentioned in the bio that I was honored to be on your podcast too. And so I think mutual honor in going on. Now we can
move forward.
Hand, right? So the focus that I'm taking today, and I did kind of do a little disclaimer at the beginning in the bio, is that some people may find it a little difficult to talk about because we're going to be addressing death and dying, and specifically how it impacts a child or a teenager when someone who is very, very close to them has passed away, whether it be something that's very sudden or something that maybe, it takes a longer time period, like cancer, but still the effects, the trauma is still there. And we know, right? Death is something that I would say, especially in Canada, the USA, the United Kingdom, that we don't like talking about. The irony is they say there's 2 things we can guarantee: death and taxes.
Yeah.
Right? But we still kind of don't seem to embrace it or allow it to become a part of our life, our society, the way some cultures do in Eastern European countries, in Asia, very different approaches to the death and the grieving process. So I really appreciate you being willing to open up about what happened to you. So let's begin.
Yeah.
What happened?
So it's really a unique experience, obviously, to go through in this situation. I was very fortunate in that I'm the youngest of 10 kids. We have a very close family. With that said, this was the first experience that I had ever had with anything on this level of challenge. And I know for myself, it wasn't something that I liked to talk about or wanted to talk about. And I remember this very vividly. I was a sophomore in high school when my mother became ill with breast cancer, and she went through, the mastectomy and the chemotherapy and the radiation. And what I always remember from that was that when she came home, she was out of her bedroom for a while, but once she started doing treatments, then her room moved down to our living room because she couldn't go up and downstairs anymore. And we had a medical bed that was brought in for her right as you came into the house. That's where she was. And I just think back to that now. There didn't seem to be a good day going forward after that. And I didn't want to ask a lot of questions, more because I didn't want to know the answer. That really is what it came down to. I didn't want to know the answer, even though I knew what that answer was. And going into my junior year, to give you an idea on really my level of wanting to talk about this, was that it was the weekend going into March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. It was that weekend. The weather was nice. My friends were coming to pick me up on a Saturday morning. And I told my dad we're going out to Two Lights, which was a place where it was on the coast, and there was a lighthouse there, and we were going to watch there had been a storm that had come through, and we were going to watch the waves. And my father said, "You can't leave the house." And I said, "Well, what do you mean I can't leave the house?" And he said, "Your mother's going to die this weekend." And that really was the first time it had ever even entered my mind on that level that this was it. And I remember having to go back and call my friends on the phone saying, basically, I can't go out with you this weekend, and breaking down and crying, saying my mother's going to die this weekend. So that was my first experience with that. And it's very vivid to me. Fortunately, I had a good network of friends. I had a very close family, but I went into some dark places. I drank heavily at parties and things like that. And that was my escape in terms of dealing with that. Now, I also had the flip side of this where I was a good athlete. I became president of my senior class as, in high school, and things were sort of back on track. And then after I graduated, coming into that summer, I was going to be going off to Fordham University in New York City, or in the Bronx. And my dad hadn't been feeling well, and said he was going into the hospital, or was going into his physician to get checked. And about a week later, he asked my sister and I to go out with him for lunch, and just had a conversation. This is what's going on. They think they've found something in my stomach, but everything should be fine. And I remember at that moment that, and my sister Eileen and I looked at each other and just knew that this was not going to be positive. And I remember driving home and staying quiet, and getting to our house and sitting in the living room where my mother's bed had been not that long before that. And the TV was on, and my aunt came in the front door, and I knew she knew what was going on. And I just couldn't look at her, because I knew that if I had looked at her, I was just going to completely break down. And so it was though I was looking through the TV to not see it. So then we got to the point of, this was in August. My dad had to go in for surgery. When he had the surgery, basically the physician said that this was far more extensive than they thought. There's nothing we're going to be able to do about this. And he basically has probably 3 months to live. He had pancreatic cancer. And I remember at that point saying, I'm not going away to school. And my dad was adamant, saying, you're absolutely going away to school. So I came back and forth about every 3 weeks visiting him, and he actually passed away December 1st of my freshman year at Fordham. So that was a pretty difficult process. I mean, I remember coming home for Christmas break and waiting for the train, and it was the first time I thought, I'm an orphan. Like, I had never thought of it before, but I was actually an orphan. So
that's, just as you're telling the story, I can just feel myself, because we know, you were a young adult, so you were just about to go into, university, and it's so overwhelming that first of all, you have to live through the experience of your mum being sick, having treatment, and then sadly her death, and then it happens again. Did you feel angry? Did you feel a sense of betrayal? I know.
Yes and yes.
Yes.
Yes and yes.
You, in your brain, you have to be silently raging at the world. Even if you're devoutly spiritual or religious, you still, I would imagine, still have to be raging at God.
Yeah, Tracey, you bring up a really such an important part of this, and there are some things that you just they're part of your memory forever. And I can remember the surgeon walking down the hall to my father's room, where he wasn't there yet, but he was walking down there to have a conversation with us about what had happened during the surgery. And I can still remember the way he was walking, and his hands were behind his back, and he kept twitching his thumbs, almost though he was nervous of what he was going to have to tell us. And I remember as soon as he told us that I come from as I said, a large family, and we were grown up Catholic and very religious. We always went to church, and I remember basically yelling out, saying, "There's no God." And it was out of anger. There was so much anger. Like, how could you do this?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I had to deal with this once, and now you're doing it again a year and a half later. Really? Like, what what did we do to deserve this?
And that's it, right? It's that, what did I do to deserve this? And I can see that, to me, that is kind of that defining moment, because I think how you then choose to respond to life now without your dad could set you down one of two paths, right? It could send you down a very dark path where there could be a point of no return, or a path which is going to be difficult, but eventually I like to think of it as it leads you into a new light.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because I look back on this now, and I've talked to many youth groups about what I call your past is your power. And that's how I look at this, that your past is your power. It's how you choose to deal with it. And that going through the loss of my mother, as I mentioned, I was drinking quite a bit at parties and things like that. And we went away for spring break, and we were in South Carolina. And we were actually going to a party. We were at a gas station. And I remember a gentleman pulling up in a car next to us and started talking to me about a book from Zig Ziglar called See You at the Top. And it's a self-help book. It's like and I'm thinking, who would ever stop and talk to somebody at the gas station about a book on personal development? And I look at that now of how important that was to me at that point, because I think that provided a lot of guidance to me in terms of this idea that we control where we're going to go and how we deal with things, that we have that ability to do that. Because I read that book as soon as I got home. I went and took it out from the library because that was it just had such an impact on me. And I do believe that helped me navigate going through what I experienced with my dad. That if it wasn't for that, I think I could have gone down a dark road that I couldn't have recovered from.
And I love that you said that, because I'm a huge believer in there are no accidents. That sometimes people appear in your life and you may not even know who they are. I call them earth angels. And they are able to give you some support or some words of guidance or something which are able to move you from that point, that fork in the road, to a better place. And so I think what are the chances?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? What are the chances?
And Tracey, I've always joked when I do this talk for kids, I think, or I tell them, like, never since then has anybody stopped me at a gas station to tell me about a book I should read.
I know. Isn't it? I've never ever gone to a gas station and had them tell me about a book I should read. And it is, myself, I've had strange things happen, and afterwards you think, oh my goodness, that was what I call those pivotal moments where it's like, I need to help you get onto a new track, and it just gives you that nudge. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you said that you were the youngest of 10 children?
Yeah. Youngest of 10.
So obviously your siblings, much older, had likely married, maybe had their own families.
Right.
Were they living close by, or were they?
So several were living close by. My brother John actually was the only one that was still living in the house that we were in at that point, because he was going to law school for that last semester. So I think back on this now of finishing up college. So when I came home after he graduated from law school, which was that next year, I lived in the house for the summer by myself. And I think about that now as somebody who has a 22-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 13-year-old. I can't imagine that they would do that, especially for my 22-year-old, that he would come home and live in our house alone by himself. But that was just what was done. And again, I look back on this now, and certainly many mistakes that I made along the way, that there were moments of darkness. I know I went through pretty significant depression. My freshman year, I speak about this in one of my episodes on my podcast about I had all these things going for me as I left high school: president of class, captain of sports teams, winning awards, going to Fordham. And it was the first time in my life that I actually felt such a deep sense of loneliness. And I look at it when I was at Fordham, there wasn't a time that I ate on campus that I sat with somebody else, which was so unlike who I was. I was a very outgoing, extroverted person. Not once was there somebody that I sat with and ate with at lunch. It was a very lonely period for me, but a very important period in terms of, I look at that now in terms of how I grew because of that, because it was the first time that I had to sit with myself and really say, who is Patrick? It's the first time I'd ever had to do that. And it fortunately, it turned out okay.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's interesting because I think one of the challenges in society today is that very few people, adults especially, know how to sit with themselves and be comfortable with their own isolation, their loneliness, their solitude, as it were. And so as adults, if many struggle, how can we expect our children, our teenagers, young adults to even get to that space where it, of that self-reflection and moving forward from that place? It's we're a very different society.
Yeah, and so do you mind? There are three things that I talk about when I speak to youth in regards to your past is your power, and I look and say there are objects around us that we can draw inspiration from. So I speak about three of them in one of the talks that I do. One is a GPS, one is antique furniture, and the last is a smoke detector, and how we can learn from each of those. So the GPS is, to me, that thing that we all have on our phone or in our car, and that if it's on, and if you're like me, maybe there are times where you haven't been paying attention and you miss the street that you're supposed to go down. And what does the GPS do? It simply says, recalculating. And if I were to miss that next street, it would do the same thing. It would recalculate, and it would continue to do that. My time to get to my location is going to take longer, but at no point does the GPS say, pull over, stop driving, you're not smart enough to figure out how to get there, you can't do this. But we do that to ourselves. We make mistakes, we take the wrong exits, so to speak, in sort of a metaphorical way. And what do? We say, I'm stupid, I can't do this, I'm no good.
Negative self-talk, oh yes.
We don't allow that GPS that really is in us that could simply say, recalculating. You've made a mistake, but now you can just move forward. Take the next exit. You had this terrible thing happen to you. Now, how are you going to detour around this? You have the ability to do that if you choose to, if you think about your internal compass like a GPS. And to me, once you get past that, the next is, what do we then do? We beat ourselves up over past decisions. And that, to me, is where the antique furniture comes in, is because I was watching Antique Roadshow a number of years ago, and on one of the episodes, they had somebody bring in a piece of, it was a dresser that the family had refinished. And they were so proud of this thing. It looked beautiful. And when the appraiser asked them to give the background, they said, it's been in our family for generations. We decided to refinish it. And he went on to say that the value of the piece, as you have it now refinished, is worth about $5,000. And they were thrilled. He said, if you had not refinished it and left it in its original, it would probably be worth 5 to 10 times that amount. And again, to me, I look at how that impacts our lives. The value of us is in the dirt, is in the nicks and the mistakes we've made. That's our value. And we're in a society right now where everything is filtered, or let's take the picture 6 times and
Photoshop it.
Right, and Photoshop it, right? And it sets up a false image of what life is really like. And it creates so much, I think, anxiety in individuals when they look around and say, oh, did you see where the Smiths went on vacation? And you don't know how the Smiths don't get along at any other point except for when they took that picture. And we miss that. And then the last piece is, to me, is the smoke detector. And I relate that to the amygdala that we have, that is the primitive part of our brain that is fight, flight, or freeze. And we talk ourselves out of more things in terms of risks that we could take or things that we should do because that smoke detector in our brain is saying, emergency, don't do this. But it's defective in that it's not a real emergency. It's like burnt food on the stove, that the smoke detector goes off, but we know it's not a real emergency. We don't run out of the house calling 911 because we burnt food on the stove. In our smoke detector in our brain, that amygdala, we need to be able to say, this isn't a real emergency. Take a chance. Don't talk yourself out of taking a risk or doing something outside of the norm. Those are the three things that have really helped me to move past my mistakes and also to reduce the noise in my own head that tells me you can't do something.
And I love that analogy. I'm the same. In my book, I talk about when I was going through my very severe depression, the ants in the brain, automatic negative thoughts.
Yeah.
Ants, they just multiply, and the next thing you know, you've got a whole nest of ants in your head, and they're running riot, and it's nothing but negativity, and negativity in itself is exhausting, and it just keeps dragging. It does, and it keeps dragging you down. And what I find so sad and also scary is the society we're in right now. As you've said, right, everything is filter. It's photoshopped. It's materialism. It's you have to be better than everyone else. You have to be the best. And we've lost the ability to tell children, to tell teenagers, you know what? You're not always going to succeed at something. And I don't like the word failure, because I don't believe if you've tried something, you're not a failure.
Yeah, I agree.
And yet we always say, oh, well, you didn't win the race, you're a loser. No, you ran the race. And yet this is the mindset that we have in society. And this is what many, many parents, many teachers, not all, but many, kind of instill in our kids as their brains, their brains are fresh and ripe and it's developing. And we already plant that seed of not good enough, never good enough, you didn't win, that means you're a loser. And it sets us off on a path where, yes, by the time we get to an adult, we're never going to take risks, because it's what would people say? What can I do? How can I hold my head up? And I'm trying in the podcasts and in the YouTube videos that I do to try and reinforce to parents and adults out there that it's not failure and it's not weakness. Look at it as a learning opportunity. If they fail, if they didn't pass the exam, then how can I change things the next time? Did I not study this? Was there too many distractions? It's learning opportunities. It's not that that's it, you're done, you're dumb, you're never going anywhere. But that seems to be in society what we say.
Yeah. And Tracey, there's great research out there in terms of that exact struggle that goes on. And the research actually suggests that when we reward for effort as opposed to outcome, that kids stay motivated, and they will take more risks when they don't have to be praised on you won. They're praised on you took a chance, you put the effort in, because that can always be improved upon. I can't always decide if I'm going to win this thing or not, but I can look in the mirror or have somebody else recognize and say, I can see you put a lot of effort into that. That is motivating for kids.
I 100% agree, and that's something that I uphold very strongly. And I mean, even I'm speaking from an adult perspective here, but even in the work that I'm doing now, I get a lot of backlash, I get a lot of negativity, I can get a lot of hate mail. because mental illness is such a stigma to begin with, but when we then relate it specifically to children or teenagers, people have a hard time even reconciling with the fact that, yes, they can have anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder. And it's funny because people keep saying to me, you still keep showing up.
That is life.
And I said, I made a commitment, when I began this new life journey. And of course, I'm going to keep showing up, because how else are we going to try and create some kind of change? If at first you don't succeed, you have to. And I think that's what many kids are missing nowadays, because we have the parent that says, oh, well, then don't do it again. Oh, well, don't worry about it. Let's pick something else that you can do. That'll be easier. And it's setting them up for a lot of raw experiences as they get older, because they have not developed the coping strategies and the resilience and the ability to look at what life throws at them and say, okay, I kind of know how I can deal with this,
Yeah. And there are times, Tracey, and again, I catch myself at times with our kids, if they will say they're going to do something, and maybe in the back of my head, I'm thinking, boy, that's a pretty big thing that you're putting out there, and holding it back to not say why they can't do it or should look to do something else. And to me, it's that smoke detector again. It's just my trying to potentially protect them. That I don't, so it doesn't always come from a place of people maliciously, or parents not wanting their kids to succeed. It's this broken smoke detector again, of we're trying to protect them, when in reality, that's when we grow, is when we make the mistakes.
And that's it. It's I always say, if I just read a book on vulnerability by Brené Brown, and a woman gave an example of what is her vulnerability, and she said it was encouraging my child to learn to play the cello when deep down I knew that would be something she could never do, but I encouraged her to do it because I wanted her to go through that experience, to be the one to recognize that maybe this isn't going to work for me. She was tone deaf and she was not musically inclined, and she had this vision that she could just, pick up the cello, and not understanding the work that went into it. And she said that was my vulnerability, was saying, you know what, this is something she wants to do, and so I'm going to support her in this, and then when things may not work out, I will still be there to support her. And I think that's the big thing. It's that love, it's that unconditional love and validation of, okay, so it didn't go the way you wanted, but that hasn't changed how I feel about you.
Yeah, without question. And I think also it's putting our stuff aside. That who is this about? Is it about me, or is it about you?
Yes.
And I find, for me, when I'm in those places, it's more about me. When I'm struggling with it, it's about me and how it reflects on me than her.
And we always love to kind of transfer our thoughts, our own inherent fears and insecurities onto other people, and especially many parents unknowingly do it onto their children, because maybe their experience of it was so difficult that they can't bear to put their child through that pain and anguish, not understanding that everyone deals with things differently. And as I said, sometimes it's harsh learning opportunities. I mean, going back to the experience with losing both parents, your learning experiences is so different from many, but it's still, do you look at it, it's not you can't change what happened, and it's very, very unfair, and it's very, very sad, but do you look upon those times as a learning opportunity, a time for you to reflect on what's important in life and move forward?
Without question. Now, obviously, if I were to be transported back to that moment, would I want that again? No. But as I look at it now, that series of deaths that I experienced made me the parent that I am, in terms of how I interact with my children. And both of my parents were very loving and very supportive, but they worked a lot. If you think about having 10 kids, right? And I watched both of my parents not be able to come to any of my sporting events. Now, my dad did after my mom passed away, so my senior year, but there was just going to be a different relationship that I wanted to have with my kids, knowing that how quickly it can go. And how important it is, what things are important to me. Family that is a value for me that is very important, that I've probably lost jobs because of it, because that was something that I wasn't willing to sacrifice that piece to work on a project that was going to take me away from maybe an event, a sporting event that I just wasn't going to do that.
And I completely understand that. And I know any traumatic experience, any a death, incarceration, even divorce, a death of a pet, there are so many different experiences that a child or a teenager may have to deal with and respond to. But I find with support and that validation and that love and that encouragement, they can move on to a path where they become the best version of themselves, I think.
Mm-hmm.
They see things so very differently than maybe their friend who's not gone through that, because they've suddenly in a short period of time learned to appreciate what's the most important.
Yeah. I remember my uncle sending me a note, and in it was, I think it was a scripture reading that basically said something along the lines of, God doesn't put in front of you more than you can handle. And that always stuck with me, right? In terms of as many mistakes as I made and the things the wrong turns that I made, there was something inside of me that I just expected that things would work out for me. And that I felt like I had an obligation to my parents to not let this define me in a negative way.
Because they would, yes, if they were alive, that would probably break their hearts more than anything.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting, though, Tracey, as we talk about this in terms of grief, which is really what this is, that I think we all deal with grief differently. Being part of the Center for Grieving Children, that's one of the things that I certainly recognized is here I was showing up as a volunteer thinking, well, I've got this figured out. I lost both of my parents. I know how to tell somebody else. And it's not about that at all. It's about sitting with other people so that they can grieve however they want to grieve. And for some people, it takes 6 days. And for some, it takes 6 years. And it's not for me to judge that if it takes you 6 days, you didn't really care. And if it's 6 years to say, get over it, life goes on. That's not my place. We all deal with it differently. And I think today, and we had this conversation before we started the recording, is that there is an extreme amount of grief that we're dealing with right now. It's a different death, but we're all grieving in a different way. Loss of liberties, socialization, things that people look and think, when will I ever be in a crowd again or be able to hug people and shake hands? And that is tremendous loss that I don't think fully is appreciated in terms of we're social beings. We need connection. We're pack animals.
We certainly do, yes.
And we need to understand that. We need to recognize that grief and the loss of those things and not allow us to get incapacitated because of it, but to recognize that it's grief and figure out a way to navigate it.
No, I 100% agree. And before we started the podcast, we were discussing some of the issues that's going on because of the pandemic. And I think we both agree that it is our children, our teenagers, the young adults who are being so directly impacted by this, because this is the time where more than anything they need that peer support, that connectedness, that feeling that they belong to a tribe that likes them, supports them, that they can have fun with, they can talk about things that they don't want to talk to, parents or adults about, right? I mean, it's their own little gang. And sadly, because of what's happened, this has been taken away from them through no fault of their own. And it's so easy. Yes, it's a great opportunity that many of them can maybe reconnect with their family, with their parents, with their siblings. But for many, they also are living in very unsafe environments.
Exactly.
So the ability to go to school, to connect with their peers outside of the home, was in effect their safe zone, but also their therapy, their comfort, that ability to know that they had their support and they could continue going on. And it actually greatly worries me that we're not paying enough attention globally.
I agree.
Because at the very beginning I said to friends, I think the increase in self-harm, depression, anxiety in our kids is going to go to an epidemic proportion. We already know they're more vulnerable to it because of what the societal demands and expectations they're dealing with. But we've now added in this, and the fact that we then say, okay, well, next week you're going back to school. But we're still putting restrictions. You have to have that 6 foot or that 2 meter bubble. And I don't think people, I think that sometimes, I think the government, the hierarchy in all countries, I'm not even pointing fingers at any country, they're concentrating too much on the education component and making the grades without thinking about their social learning development and how are they navigating this as they deal with the thought that they could get sick or someone they know could get sick and possibly die, but also that they're not able to sit with their friends at the skateboard park, and they may not even talk. That's the funny thing, they're usually all on their phones, but it doesn't matter, right? They're there.
You're right.
They're there. And I don't think we have any idea the detrimental impact this is going to have.
Yeah. And the research is so clear on the impact that stress and isolation have as it relates to mortality and learning. I mean, it's on par with cardiovascular disease and smoking as a risk factor for mortality. And again, I am with you on this. I think it's one thing that we have completely just underappreciated what the long-term impact of this is going to be. And even 6 feet, that these are things that we never had to think about before. And that in and of itself has such anxiety. You probably experienced it yourself. You turn the same way as somebody, and all of a sudden it's like you have to dodge each other. It's something that you never would have thought about prior to. And I think it adds a whole level of anxiety of things that we're just not used to because we're pack animals.
We are, absolutely. And I think another thing is that we don't have the literal connection, the power of touch. And I know lots of people say they miss the hugs, but it doesn't even necessarily have to be the hugs. It can just be that touch on the shoulder, or the pat on the wrist, or just that sitting next to them, as I said at the skateboard park, feeling shoulders, touching shoulders.
Totally.
And you're playing a game together and you're not really saying anything, but it's that body contact which shows you are part of something more. And as we've always talking about isolation, they've done studies on isolation and loneliness. In Britain, they actually have a minister of loneliness because of the number of elderly that were living alone and were isolated. And yet we don't think, well, what about the kids? What about the kids? Because just because you're in, as I said before, just because you're in a home with two parents and a brother and sister, does not mean you're in a loving, nurturing family life.
Yeah. Yeah. So just one thing I'll add to the story. When I was in college, it was the first time I got sick, really sick. I ended up having to come home and going to a physician. I was diagnosed with what was called spastic colitis. And I had never been sick before. And really, I knew it was because of the stress that I was under, the isolation of being alone that created that. Clearly.
Absolutely. And I actually released a video and a blog post about this. What people don't understand is that stress and isolation, a child's and a teenager's, their brain and body is still developing. We know, right? In a boy, the brain doesn't fully develop till 24 to 27. In a female, it's 21 to 24. And when we are stressed and when we're feeling anxious and isolated and sad, that floods our brain with inflammatory chemicals.
Right.
It just goes head to toe. And I call it, I refer to it as, it's like putting your foot on the accelerator when the car's in neutral or park, and it's just revving. And just, we keep flooding the body. And I don't think people understand the harmful impact that has, just as you said, right? What it does for heart disease, autoimmune disorders, it's even cancers, they're linking to this inability to handle this constant, and this is it, it's not transient stress. What's going on right now is constant, and there's nobody saying to us on the 5th Sunday in August it'll all be good again. We're trying to encourage kids to hold on to hope, but we ourselves do not know what that outcome is, and so the fear doesn't help and the uncertainty either. And we know that what this inflammatory chemicals does is it sets you up not only for chronic health conditions in the present and in the future, but also it increases your likelihood of developing a mental illness, or it puts you at increased risk of being victimized, because it's kind of like your safeguard is done. Addiction, risky behaviors. It's so much that our kids are having to deal with right now. And I almost wish when they're having the teachers do their online classes, they would have some form of, open dialogue about what's going on, what is helping them, how can they connect in some way with their peers so they don't feel alone, how can they help deal with this isolation. This is the opportunity where we could really help them try and make sense out of it all, and then help other people. But I fear that when all this is over, whenever that may be, we will not have the same society as before. We know that, but emotionally, I think we have a younger generation that will be forever changed. And unless we start putting safeguards in now and helping them, so many of them could go down that slippery slope.
Without question. I think in many regards, we've chosen short-term solutions, and some of them are necessary, and we've disregarded long-term impacts.
I agree, and I'm a huge advocate for we need to deal with the problems upstream, not deal with the catastrophe downstream. And the way it's going right now, I see that we're going to have catastrophes downstream, and we're losing enough kids as it is, to what's going on in the world. And the fact that we're going to lose more to this it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's yes. Yes.
And I'm guessing you would probably agree with this. If we talk about this from a standpoint, well, how do you build resilience? Because that's the important thing too, right? If the situation doesn't change around us, what can we do to control ourselves? And I will tell you, one of the things that I find can be most valuable is thinking of things that you're grateful for and writing them down. Starting out every day, write down 3 things you're grateful for and try and make them different every day. So if there are so many things to be negative about if you watch the news or read the paper or whatever, is to really sit when you wake up first thing in the morning and say, what am I grateful for today? What are the things that I'm grateful? And you'd be surprised what that does neurochemically in terms of expectations as well. It puts you in a better place.
I agree, and I've said in many, many podcasts and in my book, part of my healing came when I made a conscious effort to express gratitude every day. And it's being present, for that moment and appreciating what's going on around helps you move you from that negative place to a more positive place. And in fact, in the article that I wrote, where I'm giving strategies that parents, can use to try and help their teenagers, who are having difficulties, it's, encourage them, creative expression, art, music, poetry, but also talk about, gratitude. And okay, so you know what, I can't go outside and meet with my friends, but I can go outside and sit in the garden, and he can actually come over and we'll have to sit across the ways, but we can both still play the game. And there's little things that you can try and do to get that connection. But I'm hopeful that as we start seeing the clouds part and we have a better idea where we're going, that they're going to start implementing some of this help to move our kids to that place, because they're feeling so many losses, just the inability to graduate, to have that homecoming party. There's so many things that they're feeling have been taken away from them. They still have to deal with that. It's not
you're right.
Get over it. It's like, no, this was something that they planned for. This was very important. It's a rite of passage. So we still have to look at how we can honor that for them.
Yeah. There's a journal that I'd love to offer your listeners if they want. It's free, and it's based on a lot of research. I called it the Power Journal. Okay. It's based on 5 activities. One is praise. It's writing down 3 things you're grateful for. The O is that you do something for somebody else every day, that's where you gain purpose. The W is for writing, and that's at the end of the day, write what went well for the day. Just 2 sentences about what went well for the day. And that way you bookend your day. You start out in a place of gratitude and you end your day in a place of gratitude. The next is find some time to exercise, minimum of 10 minutes. Go for a walk. And then lastly, so that's the E, the exercise, and the power, which is an acronym. And the R is about relaxation. Find 2 minutes of time that you can maybe just work on your breath. Just focus on your breathing, some mindfulness exercise. And those 5 activities take less than an hour a day. And it's based on research. It's specifically based on one study that was done by Sean Aker called the Happiness Challenge, 21-Day Happiness Challenge, that individuals had to do all 5 of those activities, and not even all of them every day. But what they found was at the end of 21 days that those that did those activities reported themselves as happier and in a more well-being. And that's what we need.
And I can attest to that as an adult. And I know for those that have been following the podcast, we've had a number of experts in brain health come on and talk. And those are exactly what they're saying. It's the gratitude, it's the reflection, it's the exercise, it's the deep breathing, it's that being with yourself.
Yeah.
It does. I know it sounds strange, but it really does move you to a different place. Yeah. When I was taught to express gratitude and be mindful, I struggled for 2 weeks. Because I kept...
It's a muscle.
It is, and I kept, my psychologist said, Tracey, you have to do this, because 2 years in, suicide, the depression was still so bad. And he says, your brain is fractured, and you've got to start helping it heal. I was doing the diet, the exercise, everything else, and I still wasn't where I wanted to be, thought I should be, again, my expectations. And he said, you journal every day. Why don't you actually write and express gratitude? And of course, in my darkness, I'm like, what have I got to be grateful for?
Yeah.
And he said, you got out of bed this morning. You have air that you can breathe. You have running water. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I went home and I started writing them down. but of course it just became automatic. Today I'm grateful for, I have electricity, I got a car, I can, and I kept beating myself up because I'm like, I'm missing something. I'm not understanding what it is. And it was weird because my defining moment was stepping outside and seeing a purple crocus which had broken through the snow, and being mesmerized initially by the color of the purple against the white backdrop. And then it inherently made me relax. It felt very peaceful and relaxing looking at it. I remember smiling, thinking, what a gorgeous color. And then all of a sudden it was new growth has broken through the harshness of winter. Spring is on its way. Life continues. And that was my light bulb moment. And I was seeing my psychologist later that afternoon, and I went in and he said, so? And I said, I think I may have finally grasped what gratitude is. And he goes, okay, tell me. And I related what I saw with the crocus, and he literally jumped out of his chair and he went, yes, Tracey, you've got it. And it does take practice, but now it's second nature to me. Now, I mean, I'm sitting out a window and I'm looking outside and I see a tree which is literally bursting forth with pine cones, and there's a bird going in the birdhouse, and I'm thinking, how beautiful is that? And it does. And I've spoken to so many people who've been in the same situation, and there is so much to be said about taking a deep breath, being with yourself, and looking at the big picture of what is really beautiful around you, and expressing gratitude that you have had the opportunity to experience it.
Yeah. And there are times where you can be grateful for your challenges, that when you do that, it takes the power away from them, right? I'm going to grow from this. When I'm grateful for it, it takes some of that sting away from the challenge that I'm dealing with.
Absolutely. And it's all in, I call it, don't react, respond.
Without question. Yeah.
Question. So Patrick, it's been absolutely awesome. We could, oh my goodness.
Thank you so much.
We could go talking about this forever. However, we will continue this dialogue when you join me for the live podcast.
Well, thank you. I certainly would love to do that.
Detail, because I think this is something that we're going, especially with our kids now, as more and more areas are opening up and we are trying to return to a semblance of normality, then is the time where we really need to be nurturing.
Yeah, and I agree. And you know what, Tracey, and I think is to recognize that grief is okay, that we need grief. And there are times with my parents, and I will tell my kids and they will see it, there are times that I still cry about the loss of my parents. And I've had that conversation with them. I'm saying, I never want that to change, because when I cry, it reminds me of how much I appreciated them. And I do feel that loss. And it's a good memory. I don't want that to go away, to forget that feeling.
No, I agree. And I mean, crying, sorrow can be very cathartic because it gives you that connection still, despite the sadness, and it allows you to still carry those memories, those thoughts, those things that are so important to you that you learned from your parents. And so, yes, Patrick, thank you.
No, thank you. So much appreciated this.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait to talk to you again on the live show. It's going to be great. And yes, this is the live show is going to be different again, because we're carried on very different networks. And the good thing is that people can actually, from the communities, can interact with us in real time.
I love that.
So it'll be great for people to pose questions, share thoughts, and I think it'll be a really great learning opportunity for so many people as well. So, Patrick, thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute joy. I am so very grateful. So we're going to take a very quick commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Patrick Veroneau is the founder of the Emery Leadership Group and hosts a weekly podcast called Reimagining Leadership. He has a master's in organizational leadership and is trained extensively in the areas of emotional intelligence, influence, and personality. And many of the life and business models that he's developed are rooted in the research and real-world experiences from these three disciplines. Patrick has focused his career on helping individuals, teams, and organizations reimagine what it means to lead and succeed on a more conscious level. He's also a member of the Forbes Coaches Council, the Harvard Business Review Advisory Council, the National Speakers Association, and is an adjunct instructor at SMCC. Make sure to find him online at emeryleadershipgroup.com. Make sure to check out his podcast, Reimagining Leadership, on all of your podcasting sites. Plus, follow him on social media at Coach Patrick V on Twitter and on Instagram.
Welcome back, everyone. I do hope that you enjoyed this week's episode of Engage, Educate, Empower with Patrick Veroneau. An amazing conversation with an awesome guy. Truly, I know we ran over, but so much great information and helpful suggestions to help our kids and adults everywhere. Please do check him out and follow him on social media. So, as usual, I want to wish you all a safe, happy, and healthy week. Please stay safe, take care, and join me again next Thursday for another awesome guest on Engage, Educate, and Empower. Have a good week, everyone. Bye-bye.